I'm Connor Rebush, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush, joined once again by Patrick Wyman, and we are very, very excited to bring you on today's episode, inarguably the biggest interview we've ever had on this show, UFC bantamweight champion, the once and current king, the Dominator, Dominick Cruz. Dominick, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here. What's up, guys?
Not much. We are excited to talk to you about technique and training and strategy and fight analysis. We know that you've been doing a lot of interviews. You have been showing off the trash talking skills that you polished over your recent layoff, and you came back meaner and more cutting than ever, it seems. But we'll give you a little bit of break for the time being from talking about Urijah Faber and ask you about what some guy. And we're going to ask you about being an analyst, first off and foremost. We've had Brian Stan on this show, and we asked him, what was the main difference in his mind between being a fighter and being an analyst, and what was similar between those two positions?
Well, what's interesting about it for me is I've actually been one and then been the other and then gone back to being a fighter again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I was a fighter, and then I stopped fighting, and I was an analyst, and then I stopped being an analyst, and now I'm a fighter again. So it's like, it's kind of weird because I still can be an analyst when I need to, but I'll always be a fighter, And when you're a fighter, you see things on a different plane than just an analyst who's watching on the outside. There's certain things that you see as a fighter that you can't see unless you fought before, and that's why Brian Stan's one of the best there is too. I mean, he was a WEC champion back in the day, and on top of that, he's just got a mind for seeing things. And I think just because he's faced some of the better guys in the world, he sees both sides of the spectrum. He sees the fighter's aspect, and then he sees the behind the desk aspect, and that's basically how it works. You got to be able to break down both things, and when you can put both of those together, you get both views, and then you can break it down the most for everybody is really what it comes down to. I mean, if you got a guy who's never fought before, there's certain reads he's just not going to see, like circling certain ways, staying on the weak side, even using those terms. I mean, I can't even explain to you how many times I've used terms breaking down fights that now you hear guys using all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's just because I fought before that I can use those terms. So it's just different when you fight is basically what it comes down to.
So in your mind, having been a fighter and still being a fighter makes your analysis different. Do you think that having worked as an analyst improved you as a fighter in any way?
I like to think so because it just helped me keep my mind in the sport more than anything is what it did. Is what I realized. Like I became an analyst not because I wanted a desk job or wanted to necessarily do all that, but because I knew how important it was to keep my mind in the game and to keep progressing with the game. If your mind's progressing with the game and the reads and the understanding of the fight game, then it's much easier for your body to come back and utilize the things you've been thinking about, if that makes sense. So I'm not staying at the same level I was the entire time I was hurt. Mm-hmm. I was still growing my brain. And your brain is the driver of the car. You could put me in the NASCAR and have me racing against Dale Earnhardt, but who's going to win that race? I mean, regardless of if we have the exact same car, Dale Earnhardt's going to win because he's a different driver. So the point is, when you have the brain and you have the understanding, you're a different kind of driver of the race car. And that's basically what I did by being an analyst, is I changed the driver in the car. We're all race cars out there that are fighting. Every single one of us comes in shape. We're all strong. We're all peaked. we're all ready to go on that one night. So what really deciphers the two of us is the driver of the car.
Mm-hmm.
What really deciphers the two of us is the brain inside the body that's fighting. And so I just constantly am trying to grow that and evolve that and make that better. And then everything else can follow and become stronger and sharper with it.
Yeah, something that comes through very clearly in listening to you talk, both as an analyst and when you're talking about your upcoming opponents as a fighter, your level of preparation is really clear. So when you're preparing either for your work as an analyst or a commentator or for a fight, what's that process look like? And do those two things? Do you share tools in common as you switch back and forth between the two?
Well, what it is preparation comes in. It's a mentality. So you look at Brian Stan as another good example. I mean, that guy is, he's been a veteran. He's a real warrior, like legitimately outside of the cage. And then he's also been in the cage, and then he's an analyst. But I think what makes Brian so good is how well he prepares, right? I mean, you see him and you know, like, he's the guy who has all his, I picture going to his house and everything's folded. Everything's in perfect line. You know, he's got his hair cut high and tight. He's got the crease down the middle of his shirt, down the middle of his pants. Like, that's from years and years of military and years of just preparing and being perfect because that's how he was trained to be. Well, with wrestling being my background, I've always learned to just overwork. And it's not always the talented that wins, but it's the one who, puts in the most preparation and thought into things. So I just carried my wrestling mentality over to winning world titles in mixed martial arts. And then I took the mentality I had in winning titles in mixed martial arts over to being an analyst. I just said, whatever work ethic I put forth in the fighting, I just need to translate that energy over to being an analyst, and I'll be just fine. And that's what I did. I mean, all the extra work I did in fighting is I did it to prepare for these fights before I went in there and broke them down. And when I did that, I just came very prepared and ready, and I understood everything that was going on, and I saw all angles of each aspect of each fight. And then it just gave a different look and a different insight to the people at home.
So, Dominick, you mentioned that you have this work mentality, this crazy work ethic instilled in you from your days as a wrestler. That's evidently it's evident still in both your fighting and your commentary. Do you think that was, in any sense, that mentality responsible for some of the injuries that haunted you for the past few years? And have you changed your mentality in any way? Have you focused more on the mental work than physical work so as to avoid hurting yourself in training, or how have you evolved to account for that?
Absolutely. What you just said all makes sense. I mean, my gift is my curse. So as hard as I worked, I kind of overworked my body sometimes and then created injuries because I wasn't catering to the hints that my body was giving me. So now, after all the injuries, I understand that part of the work ethic has to be in rehab. So instead of putting all that work in towards breaking my body down, I have to distribute it evenly between building my body back up. So instead of doing, 20 or 50 hours of breakdown, I'll do 20 or like 40 hours of breakdown, 10 hours of build up for my body, if that makes sense. And it's basically the same mentality, but I'm just translating it over to rehab and therapy mixed into my work ethic, and then it keeps my body safe and healthy. For instance, I landed weird on my shoulder today, sparring, and it's just a little bit tweaked. I mean, it's not enough to stop me. It's not enough to pull me out or anything like that, but it just feels a little bit off. So tonight, I'm going to go see a therapist and do some stuff and, use a lacrosse ball on the shoulder and ice and do all these little stretches and all this stuff that I probably wouldn't have done before. Before, I would have just taken a bunch of ice, put it on it, left it alone, and just toughed it out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's just a little bit change of mentality and understanding that you got to take care of the body that gets you where you're at.
That seems to be a really common thread among fighters as they get older, is more of an emphasis on rehab. But so to build off something you talked about earlier in terms of your growth mentally as you were away, as you get more experience, as you add more skills, as you become more mentally proficient in the game, but on the other hand, as your body gets older, do you think about how you'd like to change your approach further to emphasize different things, or do you just kind of take it as it comes?
Yeah, you kind of just got to take it as it comes. if anything, I have like a degree in physical therapy at this point. I'm basically like a professional physical therapist. I mean, I've had 4 years of knee rehab. I've had over 6 surgeries between my 2 hands. I've had my ankles worked on. I've had broken ribs. I've had pretty much every injury you could think of in the book, and I've had to cater to it one way or another while I'm preparing for a fight. So with all that stuff being said, you just got to take each injury as it comes and cater to it as it comes. And because injuries are inevitable when you're training for title fights and training to fight the best guys in the world, you're going to get hurt. Things aren't always going to be perfect, and you just have to learn to work around the injuries while you stay in shape and stay hungry and stay going.
Right. Well, Dominick, it's unfortunate that injuries have been such a big part of the narrative of your career lately, but obviously the strongest narrative of your entire career, ever since your WEC days and before, is your level of technical skill. You are renowned as being one of the most technical, one of the most frequently improving fighters in the game right now. We know that you work with Eric Del Fierro quite heavily, but you are still the only fighter at Alliance, the only Eric Del Fierro student with a style quite like yours. Can you give us an insight into the origins of your style and your unique movements? Is that a collaboration between you and Eric, or is that something wholly of your own creation?
Well, I mean, I've been fighting since I was 19 years old. Mm-hmm. So it's like I'm 31 now. That's a long time to be fighting. So I started out as a wrestler. And starting out as a wrestler, if you watch wrestling, wrestlers can switch stance at any given moment. They can be right foot forward, left foot forward. And they can shoot from both sides, and they can change from both angles. So I've just translated that type of wrestling movement and added strikes to it to set up my wrestling. And I've added that kind of movement in order to set up everything else. Simultaneously, Eric has a gift for not changing your style for mixed martial arts, but taking your strengths and adding fighting sequences to your strengths. So it's like, whatever it is, he's not going to try to conform you. That's why you never see anybody with the same style from our camp.
Sure.
Because each person in our camp has a different set of skills, a different set of natural skills. And the thing is, when somebody has a natural skill, there's no reason to change it and try to conform them to something different. That is their God-given natural skill according to how their body moves and works. Why change that if that's their gift? So that's something Eric's very good at. He's taught me to be very good at that, and he's catered to that with my style. All the things that I do naturally, the gifts that I carry naturally, he's got a weird brain for being able to see how to cater to those natural gifts and then add striking fundamentals to it, or add wrestling fundamentals to it, or add grappling fundamentals to it, and not take away from the things I do naturally. And so it's just made kind of a different style. But a mixture of that is defense. I'm one of the guys that, I don't get a lot of credit for it, I think, because it's kind of non-existent in the sport of mixed martial arts, is defense. I mean, you look at some of the greats, and the great boxers in the world have outstanding defense too, and offense. And so that's just something that I've been focused on, is working on my defense so that I have defense in case somebody has very good offense. A good defense will always beat a very good offense. And if they have super good defense, then I can also cater to that and build up my offense. But according to each guy that I fight, they have a different set of skills, and I have to adjust to their set of skills. And that's where Eric comes into mind. Eric's good at looking on the outside and saying, all right, this is what this guy's good at, and we're going to focus on your defense extra for this in these areas, and we're going to focus on your offense extra in these areas. And then he can get different opponents that I have in my camp and build the person that I'm fighting according to the style that I'm facing with the different guys that we have in my camp. And he'll switch them every other round, or he'll switch them every 2.5 minutes. So I'm constantly having to adjust, and I never really get comfortable. He forces me to face every fear I could possibly have in every single fight before I even get in there. So by the time I get in there, I've seen everything, and there's nothing that really freaks me out.
So one of the things that really stands out about your footwork is something that you touched on a little bit here. It's the fact that it's multi-purpose. So it serves to enable you to be defensively sound because you're rarely there to be hit. It helps to set up your head movement, things like that. But then it also gives you offensive angles too. I mean, so when you approach your footwork at the broadest level, to what purposes do you try and put it? Do all of those things play together, or do you see each movement as accomplishing one purpose at a time?
Well, it depends on, you see, that's where the reads and adjustments come into play, and that can only happen in the fight, according to who you're facing. So that's the next step, and that's where the analytics come in, and that's where the natural adjustments come into mind. When you're facing certain guys, it's not going to be necessarily a specific game plan, but it's going to be natural adjustments that your body makes according to what your opponent's throwing at you. So when they start throwing stuff at me, I'm making certain reads, I'm making certain adjustments, I'm circling certain ways. And, a lot of my defense is mistaken as running when actually all I'm doing is steering. There's two different things. When you're steering somebody, you're actually moving them into your offense as they're being offensive. And then I'm killing two birds with one stone, because while I'm being offensive, I'm also being defensive. And so you kind of put two things together at once, and it creates havoc for the person you're fighting.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dominick, you talked before about your intense focus on defense, and I've heard it said before that offense wins fights, but defense wins championships, and that's definitely been the case for you in your career. I'm going to read you a few numbers that probably won't surprise you, but did surprise me. When you fought Urijah Faber for the second time, he landed 29% of his punches, 50 punches total, I think. And yet when you fought TJ Dillashaw after about a 3-year layoff, if I'm not mistaken, and against a much more active and I think a better striker than Faber in terms of technical skill, he only landed 27% of his strikes. He threw far, far more and still landed at a lower clip. He threw 238 more strikes than Faber, in fact. And the crazy thing is that in the Dillashaw fight, you threw 60 more strikes than you had thrown in the Faber rematch. So how is it that despite this layoff, you have managed to become a little more offensively potent, possibly a little more willing to exchange and land counters in the pocket, and yet become even more difficult to hit by a higher class of striker?
That's all adjustments in fight time, and if you look at all the interviews before I fought Dillashaw, one of the things he was saying is, my numbers blow yours out of the water. Well, wrong again, and that's something that he was priding himself on, and I knew that was what was going to get him beaten, is he didn't really see things for what it was. But when it comes to a guy like Faber, he's always looking for the counter shot. He's always looking for the big shot, and Faber's one of the best in the world at conserving energy, and that's why he never really gets tired. He saves his energy so that he can throw that super powerful punch and mix the super powerful submission attempt into it at the correct time. When you got a guy like Dillashaw who's just throwing in mass quantities and mass numbers to try to overwhelm you. Well, if you're not there, your overwhelming an opponent actually works against you and becomes your own kryptonite, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So him throwing all those numbers actually just messed up his own style, because he's used to landing. When it comes to Faber doesn't care if he lands. He's just waiting for that one big shot all the time. He's always looking for the finish. That's what he prides himself on. That's the one thing he wants and cares about, is just the finish. And I get that, but that's what allowed me to throw more numbers than him and land more than him and keep him moving back, is because he's always looking for the one big shot. So it's just a question of who you're facing and how they adjust to you, what their game plan is, and what their natural gifts are. Faber is always looking for that one big shot, so you got to be aware that with that one big shot he throws, he's looking to land it right on the button, and he's looking to be accurate with it. And he's probably might be a little bit more accurate because he hasn't been wasting any shots missing, if that makes sense.
Right.
So he's just waiting, and the one shot he's going to throw, he's going to make it count. He's not going to waste a bunch of jabs, crosses, and hooks missing and then look for the big shot afterward. He's just going to wait for one. And then after he lands the one, he's going to use the rest of his energy to get the finish. So with guys like him, you just got to keep making them guess so that they can't find that one shot.
Can that actually make it more difficult for you in a weird way as a fighter who relies on preparation and reads, as you said multiple times? Can it be more difficult to read an opponent like Faber who isn't giving you as many looks per minute?
Well, there's not as many reads, but there's more offense. So if I'm not going to have as many reads, then that allows me to circle to whatever side I need to and keep offensive, keep going, and keep landing on him. And that's what beat him last time. I was able to just keep throwing and keep landing on him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he gives no credit for. I mean, he says, oh, yeah, you're not doing any damage, you're not hurting me. But the thing is, every single time I punched you in the face, which was far more than you punched me, you didn't want to be punched. Regardless of whether it hurt or not, I'm punching you whether you want to be punched or not. And I'm taking you down whether you want to be taken down or not. And I'm scrambling and creating scrambles when you're attempting takedown and you're not getting what you want the entire fight. So there's things like that that work against Faber because he gives no respect or credit. And that's just something that I'll continue to capitalize.
Right. So we'll let you go here, Dominick. Before you do, though, can you give us basically your final notion on what this third fight with Urijah Faber will be like and how it will differ from your second fight?
Yeah, I mean, thing is, I bring the best out of Faber, so you're going to see the best Faber you've seen. You're going to see a better Faber than you saw in his last fight. You're going to see a better Faber than you've seen in any of his fights in the past years because I make that guy really angry. And when you make a guy like Faber angry, he doesn't like it, and he prepares himself better. And so that means, you know, you're going to see a good Faber, and I'm good with that. I want to see the best Faber I can see because I always come in top form. When you got two guys in top form, you're going to see nothing but one of the best fights on earth with the most technique and the most experience. Me and him got more experience than probably anybody on that card altogether in years and fights. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun. And we're throwing down, and at the end, you get to watch me raise my hand with the belt.
We are definitely looking forward to seeing it. Thank you once again, Dominick, for joining us today, and good luck to you in your fight. We are really looking forward to watching it, and we appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys, for having me. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks, Dominick.
All right, and when we return, UFC 198 is on the docket right now, so after this short break, we will be right back to discuss UFC 198, including the main event, Stipe Miocic challenging Fabricio Werdum for his heavyweight title, and much, much more.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And we are back. Dominick Cruz, Patrick Wyman. How the hell was that?
That was awesome. That was fantastic. What a sharp guy.
What a sharp guy indeed. What a guy. It's not that common that we have fighters on this show, but that's because generally the trainers, I think, are the ones who really have the know-how about how fights play out, and it's interesting to see what is the mentality behind a fighter. Fighters are often more feel than think, but Dominick Cruz is definitely a thinking man's fighter. Such a pleasure to have him on the show. And do you think, is it possible, Pat, that he was being a little modest about how he saw his fight with Urijah Faber playing out?
I think he was being more than a little modest.
Or perhaps a bit of a salesman. Like, it won't be a one-sided drubbing, that much I can tell you.
Yeah, I think that, I think he expects it to be a one-sided drubbing, because I have heard him give, in person, other descriptions of how he thinks that fight is going to go down, and he was maybe a little more definitive.
Yeah, it wasn't like, Faber's a tough guy. He'll put on a great fight. I'll bring out the best in him. What he probably really wants to do is bring out Faber's worst nightmares 2 minutes into the match. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm super excited, just for the fact that Dominick Cruz is back and even better than before, which is just amazing. So anyway, for the rest of today's episode, we are going to be discussing UFC 198. We got a couple of interesting fights on here. Of course, most prominently is the main event heavyweight title fight between current champion Fabricio Werdum and Stipe Miocic, an unlikely challenger, but a very interesting one. And then later on in the show, we're going to do a bit of a fight smorgasbord. We're going to talk about all of the other fights that interest us: Anderson Silva versus Uriah Hall, Shogun Hua versus Corey Anderson, and John Lineker versus Rob Font. Those are really the ones that really stand out, although this is a very solid card overall. And then we're going to eat a little crow about our Albert Tumanov Gunnar Nelson pick at the very end of the show. So join us for all of that. Stay tuned. First up, why don't we talk about the championship bout, Werdum versus Miocic. Miocic got this fight because Cain Velasquez was injured, really. That was the turn of events that led to this matchup happening. He's only on a 2-fight win streak, although both of those over Mark Hunt and Andrei Arlovsky, a pair of very solid wins, and then a competitive loss to Junior Dos Santos in the midst of what would otherwise be a 5-fight winning streak. So Miocic has turned into a pretty solid heavyweight. Probably not the number one guy the UFC would have chosen for this slot, but I think he actually makes for an interesting matchup. What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I do think that this is interesting because I think when we break this down, they're both big. They're both pretty athletic. I think that Miocic probably has a slight edge over Werdum in terms of raw athleticism. Yeah. But they do different things really well, despite this being a very even kind of matchup. Like Werdum, I think, is only a minus 160 favorite. He is not massively favored over Miocic here. So what I like
nor
to
should
do,
he be, by the way. This is elite heavyweight, but it's heavyweight all the same. And Miocic is, he doesn't have the numbers of wins behind him at the moment, but he is a very solid fighter.
Yeah, he's highly skilled, and what I like to do in matchups like this is think about every range individually and how they kind of stack up there. And I think that that's particularly productive for looking at a fight where both guys are about 6'4", 240 pounds. They both have long reaches. They both know how to use their reaches pretty well, but they're strong in different kind of slices of range. So from the outside in, At kicking range, this is all Werdum. Werdum is a much more imposing, much more diverse, much more dedicated kicker than Miocic is. Werdum is probably the slightly more dedicated jabber, too, though Miocic has a nice jab that he throws consistently. Call that more of a wash. You get into power punching range, and that's Miocic, even though, again, Miocic is not like the most imposing puncher. He's certainly better and cleaner than Werdum is. He's a little cleaner in terms of his tight footwork in those kinds of spaces. But then you get into the clinch, and that is all Werdum. Werdum is a much, much more imposing, much more technically skilled, much more diverse clinch fighter there. And that to me is where Werdum wins this fight. If indeed he wins it there. If Miocic wins it, he wins it in the pocket and kind of at long punching range. Like anywhere between his right hand and his left hook, that's Miocic's wheelhouse. Inside the left hook, that's all Werdum.
Yeah, I kind of think, for me, I really like Stipe Miocic when he's on. When Stipe Miocic is putting on a grade A performance, it is really, really top-notch stuff, especially by the standards of the heavyweight division. He can be one of the most impressive boxers to watch. So, like, when you watch him picking apart Roy Nelson, or when you watch him mixing his boxing and wrestling against Mark Hunt, then you're like, this guy is world championship material. I think the problem for Miocic is that this is something we haven't really discussed in the past. We talked about boxer punchers. I think Miocic is one of the easier people to classify as a boxer puncher in the UFC right now. The thing is we haven't really talked about how that might, for some fighters, be a bit of a duality of nature. And I think for Stipe Miocic, he sometimes has difficulty uniting the boxer and the puncher, because he has some really great technical fights, but sometimes he turns into this guy who is just looking to like counter and slug you with the right hand. That happened against Junior Dos Santos. The fight became a bit of a gut check, and each time Miocic would come out for a round pretty technical, working behind his jab, and about a minute in after Dos Santos had hit him with a good shot, the jab was kind of gone. Whereas times when he hasn't been able to hurt a guy or been able to feel like he was beating someone up, he hasn't had that surge of confidence or the need to just get gritty, like in the Roy Nelson fight. He has been able to be a very, very consistent, technical, strategically minded boxer.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a knock on Stipe Miocic, but let me put it to you this way, Connor. Is it possible that Miocic is just not that comfortable pure boxing?
Oh, absolutely possible. Yeah.
I think that's I agree with your assessment. I think that your assessment is spot on, but I think the mechanism here for why that is pretty straightforward. And I think that it's just that Miocic is not comfortable being a pure boxer. I think that given his choice, Miocic would like to stick you with a jab, stick you with a 1-2, and then when you come in on him, when you try to get past that long reach, then he wants to plant counters on your chin. Then he wants to exchange.
Yeah.
That's what Stipe Miocic wants to do. So in cases where Miocic has in his head, I need to box, but he gets outboxed, as he did against Junior Dos Santos, because in those kinds of that was something that really stood out to me in that fight. Is like Junior Dos Santos was a better outfighter. He was a better boxer.
Yeah, he had a pretty rough go in the beginning of the fight, and then once he got over that hump, and it became more of a boxing match, JDS had the edge.
Yeah, exactly. Like Miocic, I think embodies the kind of flaw of the boxer puncher in general, which is that you're the jack of all trades and you're the master of none. Like he can pressure, but he's not a great pressure fighter. He can box, but he's not a great outboxer. He's good in the pocket, but unlike a lot of the elite tier boxer punchers, guys like Mark Hunt, he doesn't have that fight finishing, go to sleep, knock you on your ass power. Like he hits hard, but because he's 240 pounds, not because he's like, some destructive kind of puncher.
Yeah, I mean he's got more than enough knockouts to his name, but he's not the kind of guy who tends to hit you with one shot and put you away, unless you're Andrei Arlovsky, in which case you kind of have a reputation for that happening. I'm with you. Or if you put him against a light heavyweight, do you remember the Fabio Maldonado fight?
Oh my God, that was slaughter, actual slaughter. I'm happy Stipe got paid. But
sure,
that was not a fight that ever should have happened.
A ritual sacrifice to the Brazilian blood gods for Tough Brazil 3. Who knows?
Some god-awful thing.
Some god-awful thing. Yeah, I think, but that's the thing, is when Miocic is on, and I do think actually there's a bit of that he's not that comfortable, but I think he may be getting more comfortable over time. I thought the Mark Hunt fight was a really good showing of how he could deal with a dangerous, crafty striker and still maintain his cool. I don't really recall any point in that fight where during the portions of striking, granted, he could take Mark Hunt down, but he spent at least the first 4 minutes unable to do so and unable to keep him down. And he got clipped with a few shots, but he kept his jab out there. He set everything up, and he interspersed his combination punching with some good lateral movement and found some angles. Because the thing is I think that Miocic, there's a thing I think of as instinctive counterpunching. It's like if you watch low-level MMA, everybody's a counterpuncher. You know what I mean? Because you don't want to be the guy to lead and get clocked. And so if you watch like low-level fighters who just feel confident in their power and they feel like they're fast, they wait a lot. Guys who haven't had a lot of experience, they don't feel comfortable pressuring and sticking their necks out there. And I think Miocic can turn into that guy when he gets tagged, when he feels uncomfortable. And he's not a bad counterpuncher, but he chooses to be the counterpuncher at the wrong times. Or he doesn't fit that instinct into the rest of his game. Because if Stipe Miocic was slipping the jab and throwing the counter right, or slipping inside and coming up with the counter hook, and moving laterally and keeping his jab out there constantly, he would be a really, really complete striker. Especially when he can mix in the shot takedowns and things in the interims. But it's the fact that he hasn't been able to that makes him struggle sometimes.
Well, yeah, especially because Miocic has really clean fundamentals.
Yeah,
he's got good weight transfer. He's an efficient puncher. He's not going to wear himself out throwing volume. That's why he can keep the kind of pace that he wants to keep. Because really, if we're talking about what is it that Miocic does well, he's not a huge puncher. He doesn't stand out on the feet in any particular area as like a technical marvel, but he's fundamentally sound and he wants to work at pace. Like that's what defines Miocic's game more than anything else.
Yeah.
Is like he's going to outwork you.
Do you think it looked like he sharpened up his defense a little in that Mark Hunt fight?
Yes, I think so. With the caveat that if you're looking for something to worry about from that fight, the fact that a guy that he was 6 inches taller than was still able to routinely plant his jab on him in the early rounds should be worrisome.
Sure, yeah.
Like, and now, granted, like Mark Hunt is a master at jabbing taller fighters, but what's Miocic done in the past when he's been jabbed at? The results have been not great. Everybody who has jabbed at Miocic has been able to jab competitively with him. And if there's something that stands out about Verdum's game on the feet, we've talked a lot about his body kicks. We've talked a lot about his kind of confidence and swagger and willingness to sit down and exchange. But I think what's at the heart of Verdum's transformation as a striker is his jab.
Definitely.
He's just constant with it.
You watch the Travis Brown fight. You watch the Velasquez fight. The reason I bring up defense, though, is because I think it's one of the only areas in this fight where there's like a distinct difference. Because Werdum is not a great defensive fighter.
Actually, I would say at best average.
Yeah, I'm being a little generous when I say not a great. He's not a very good defensive fighter. He gets better as the fight goes on when he starts to have the measure of your range. But the Velasquez fight is one of those ones where it will become, and it will continue to become, even more dominant in the retelling over time. But Cain Velasquez hit Fabricio Werdum a lot in that fight. And Werdum, to his credit, he showed that he is willing to fight against type, to get into a brawl when necessary, and he showed that he is tough enough and mean enough and focused enough and experienced enough to weather that kind of storm and stick to his game. But he did get hit a lot. And so, I think Cain Velasquez and Stipe Miocic have comparable power, but I think Stipe is probably a little better of a boxer mechanically. And will probably have a bit better success finding his shots at the end of his range. So if Werdum does have to get into a bit of a slugging match, what the hell is that? A slugfest? I don't know what term I'm looking for.
If he has to slugfest is the term you want.
If he has to brawl with Stipe Miocic at all at the beginning of this fight, as he did to Cain, and as he has done to a lot of other fighters who have actually been able to close that distance, then it becomes a different kind of fight. And the thing is, too, the other big difference here is that I don't think Miocic will give Werdum the clinch the way Cain did. Not as much, anyway. He much prefers low-line leg attacks to clinch takedowns. He's much better with his snatch singles and his explosive double legs and things like that than he is at getting into the clinch and getting head position and grinding you the way Cain did.
Yeah, I'm with that. The issue I see there, though, is Miocic's willingness to hang out. Miocic wants to be either at the end of his straight punches or in the pocket, right? Are we agreed on that? That's pretty much Miocic's sweet spot of range.
Yeah, or possibly on top of Werdum. I think everyone's terrified of Verdum's guard, but I'm
not sure you should be at this point.
No, it's the guard.
It's
the guard. It's a place where some people are going to be able to kill you from there, but if you play a pretty patient, stalling kind of game, like Mark Hunt survived it, you can probably do okay for a couple minutes around.
I want to come back to this in a minute because I have some thoughts on it, but continue.
No, you were. I think if he can, that's the range he wants. Either that or on top of Werdum are probably the phases and ranges he wants.
Yeah. So the problem with Miocic wanting to stick at that range is I think we're going to see Werdum doing a lot of kicking there. I think he's going to kick Miocic's legs a lot. I think he's going to kick Miocic's body a lot. One of the things that stood out that I thought was really interesting about the Velasquez fight and before that is Werdum has become a proficient counter kicker. He's really good at waiting for you to jab. You put all your weight down on your lead leg, and then he kicks your lead leg.
Oh yeah, the inside kick to counter the right hand and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And Miocic has never been good at checking kicks.
No.
You remember that fight with Gabriel Gonzaga that was unexpectedly shitty from Miocic years ago?
Yeah.
Gonzaga crushed his legs over and over and over again with really hard kicks in that fight. And I think that there's little question that Werdum is a more destructive and craftier kicker.
No argument there.
Yeah. So I think that's the issue for Miocic if he wants to make this a striking match is, he can absolutely buzz Werdum with those kinds of shots, but can he keep up in terms of attrition and time, in terms of the work that Werdum is going to want to put in to his legs and body? Can he operate at that distance without getting kind of chewed up there? If he tries to set that distance, is he going to be able to set it, or will Werdum succeed in driving him back maybe 4 or 5 more inches, where Werdum can kick him, but Miocic can't jab and cross? So, and then Then there's the issue of Werdum going on the offensive, and what happens if he can get Miocic in the clinch. There's little question in my mind that Werdum's a better clinch fighter.
Mm-hmm.
I think Werdum could take Miocic down, maybe not early. I think early Verdum's going to want to strike, but I think if he can take Miocic down, Miocic is pretty clearly in trouble there. But so you talked about Miocic getting on top. Yes, that's a good idea, but only in particular spots. You want to take Werdum down close to the cage where you can smash his hips. If you try and take him down in open space, you give him the opportunity for transitional subs, and you give him the opportunity to kind of freely play his guard game. So takedowns, yes, but against the fence, not in open space.
Do you think Werdum's a bit too much of an old school fighter in that regard, that he doesn't use the advantage of being against the fence to stand up right away? He didn't against Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt let him up, right?
Yeah,
and Mark Hunt did have him down with the nape of his neck against the cage.
Yeah, that's like. I think that speaks to Werdum being an old school fighter, but also I think it spoke to his confidence in his guard there. Like,
sure, yeah.
I think that if you had asked Werdum before that fight how he was going to win it, submitting Mark Hunt would have been the best. It would have been the answer.
If you asked anyone, it wouldn't have been knocking Mark Hunt the fuck out
with a flying knee.
Yeah.
That was not on your short list.
No, I didn't see that one coming.
Outcomes.
I saw that one coming, possibly even less than Mark Hunt saw it coming. So, I think that's a good point. But I think the thing is like we have a lot of these fights where people go into it and they say, okay, well, this is the place where you're best, so you're going to spend the whole fight there. So like Stipe Miocic has a critical distance, and I think it would be a massive mistake for him to go into this fight saying, this is where I win the fight. Because the moment that phase gets difficult, his confidence starts to really, really crumble. And the fight becomes more difficult than it really is. I think if you are a better wrestler and you have a good shot takedown and you've got a good jab or some other things to disguise it with, you got to use it. Just like if you're Alexander Gustafsson against Daniel Cormier, try to take him down. Like, even if you don't get him, you have to be able to compete in those ranges. If you're Cormier against Jones, you got to kick his legs. You got to kick his body. You've got to compete in the ranges that your opponent thinks definitely favor them. So I think if you're Miocic, your real shot of winning this fight is, to have that critical distance on the feet, but also to mix in takedowns and stall Werdum out up against the fence a little bit.
Yeah, I'm with that. But, I think it's hard to overstate here just how big the grappling edge is for Werdum. Miocic is good when he's on top, but Miocic is not a submission master. He's got a decent kind of functional top game, but he's not going to wow you with anything that he does there. He's sound, but he's not a great top player.
No.
So if Miocic wants to hit one of these quick takedowns he's got a great single leg and he runs the pipe really well. Okay, he gets Werdum down. There's a risk there where he dumps Werdum. What happens if Werdum grabs his leg and works a leg lock sweep? Is that the kind of the level of grappling knowledge that Werdum has over somebody like Miocic is impossible for Miocic to make up in any particular camp. That's the difference between wanting to grapple with somebody like Werdum and wanting to grapple with somebody like, let's say Gunnar Nelson. Verdum's or who would be another kind of dangerous grappler.
Somebody comparable to Werdum?
No, somebody is give me a tier down.
I don't know.
Dangerous in spots, but not world class.
I don't know. Keep talking. Let me think about it.
Okay, so the difference is you cannot prepare for a grappler you can't prepare for Demian Maia on the mat or Fabricio Werdum on the mat the way that you could prepare for. You're not worried about Rafael dos Anjos if you take him
Sure.
down.
I was going to say Beneil Dariush, actually. Very good grappler, but you can probably sit in his guard for a little while without much fear.
Yeah, so you can prepare for the things that those guys want to do. If you take Demian Maia down, if you take Fabricio Werdum down, there is no amount of preparation that you can do over the course of one fight camp that's going to get you ready for the sheer flowchart of options that they have available to you.
I think if I'm Miocic's trainer, then I'm literally preparing for... I'm literally thinking of that as a safety first stalling position. You sit in Verdum's closed guard so he can't do any crazy shit that you've never seen before. You have both of his legs around you. You keep your hands on his chest, and you keep him against the fence because you can't stall him in the clinch.
Yeah, but so that's what I'm saying is like, if you're going to do that, it has to be against the fence because if you think you're safe sitting in his guard in open space, anywhere where Werdum's hips can move, you're in trouble whether you realize it or not.
I think if you get him down anywhere else, which I still think you should, if you have the opportunity to break his rhythm, then you just stand up immediately.
Yeah, you hit the single leg dump, kick his legs twice, and then back out of range.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so I'm there, but I 100% disagree with the idea. You take him down in the middle of the cage. And
I'm with you there.
I think that's crazy talk.
I'm with you there. I think against the fence is a good idea, and then I think if you do get him down and you want to stay there, you do it against the fence. You sit in his closed guard. You maybe hit him with a couple shots, and then you let him stand up and try and hit him with a knee while he does, and then you back out and get back to your distance.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm there with you, and I think that's a thing that Miocic can do.
Sure.
But like as a pure grappler, if Miocic spends any amount of time with Werdum on the mat, that ends poorly.
Yeah, and it's not like it's not competitive on the feet. We talk about like, Miocic has to. The reason that Miocic probably has to, in my view, play those ranges is because Werdum is so comfortable as a striker these days. You mentioned his jab before. I think Werdum is a wonderful example of how dangerous a jab can be, not as a weapon itself, but because of all the different shit you can put behind it and all the different ways you can time it. There's one example in mind that always sticks out, which is when Werdum, Cain Velasquez has like his awkward pendulous head movement, his weird style of moving his head. He's got a bit of that. I guess he's a bit like the Nova União style of head movement. Like, who's the Nova União guy? Valmir Lazaro.
Yeah.
Who's got this weird swaying style of head movement where it's like his whole upper body moves at the lower back. Cain does that, but he does move his head. And so Werdum is fighting Cain. He's coming at him with the 1-2 over and over again, and Cain is like slipping outside, slipping to the right. Like it looks like he's hitting pads. It's very much a trained movement. And so the different ways that Werdum took advantage of that movement to counteract it, there were so many ways he had to solve that. He had the jab, and then he'd fake the right hand and follow up with the left uppercut to catch Velasquez as he was trying to slip inside the follow-up punch. He had the jab, and it would be barely a jab, like a half beat, and then he would throw a right hook to catch Velasquez as his head was dipping down to slip the jab. He had all these different ways of using the jab, and it's not like he had to hit Velasquez with the jab. All he needed was Velasquez to be reacting to the jab. Once he landed it a few times and Velasquez was trying to slip it, the jab was just as useful because Werdum was perfectly happy to use it just as a setup. And then, of course, if Velasquez stops moving his head because he's getting hit, he's going to get jabbed again. So it's perfect. It's a flawless way of using that punch, and he did it so well. You can't ever call Fabricio Werdum a marvelous technical striker, but he is so crafty. He's so well trained and so just like as he is as a grappler, he's very, very thoughtful in how he puts his techniques together.
Yeah, I think crafty is the watchword to describe Fabricio Werdum as a fighter. Like I'm currently writing a piece on Fabricio, and that's the overarching thing that describes everything that he does is craft.
Sure.
Because how else does a guy who's a good athlete but not a great one, who's not a particularly hard puncher, who's not ridiculously strong or ridiculously physical, who's got a ton of experience, rise to the top of that division? He does it through craft. He does it by understanding both inside and outside the cage how to use the gifts that he has, and the jab embodies that more than any other single strike. And the fact that Werdum is so good at using it speaks to that kind of craftiness. Yeah. Because he uses it to set his range. We talk about Werdum, but we kind of forget, well, he's 6'4". He's a he dude. And he is a legit 6'4".
He's a longer 6'4" than Miocic, who kind of has a big old head and short arms.
Yeah. Werdum in person he's a really big dude. And a legit 6'4" with long arms. He's a sizable guy. But so the jab, first and foremost, it allows him to set his distance. Werdum is kind of by nature an outside fighter. That's what he wants to do. He wants to fight from the high ground. He wants to stick and move, or just stick and then move forward into the clinch. Like all the way out or all the way in is what Werdum wants to be doing, generally speaking. So the jab helps him set that. But also, and this speaks to his craftiness, it helps him set a rhythm. He has a really tricky, really kind of odd rhythm that he's able to set, and it's that constant jabbing, the half beats here, the full beats there, the double jabs, up jabs, jabs to the body. All of these are things that Werdum can use to set that. And then he can follow, like you pointed out, Connor, with a right hand. He can follow with a right hand feint and then a left kick, which is one of his favorite things to do. He can throw another shot off his left hand after that. All of those things, they allow him to score, but they allow him to set everything else up, and they allow him to set his rhythm.
Yeah, and it all plays with rhythm. Like it's not just throwing the jab and throwing something else. It's the rhythm of the jab. It's the time the opponent expects the jab to be there, and how that affects the way that they try to avoid it. And he will then get used to seeing that evasion, and he will then, he'll set the rhythm that he wants them to react to by throwing the jab over and over, and they slip it. And then once he has that rhythm in his head, he's going to start changing it and giving them the jab so they have the same rhythm, but suddenly he's timing them with the follow up shot. It's pretty wonderful to watch. I'm picking Fabricio Werdum. I think this fight ends up a bit of the old slugging fest, and I think it's probably going to be pretty dirty in some portions early. Not dirty as in cheating, although who knows, that could happen.
Oh, but I think Fabricio would absolutely.
Sure, yeah. But just in the sense that I think it'll be a bit of a grimy fight in the early going, and I think that Werdum will start to take over, kind of similar to the Velasquez fight, and that he'll likely submit Miocic when he gets tired or hurt in the third or fourth round.
I think that's pretty reasonable. I think it goes to a decision, frankly.
Okay.
I would not be surprised if Werdum submitted him, especially because of what I've just talked about. Like, I think that if Miocic tries to hit a panic takedown at some point, I think he's going to end up scrambling with Fabricio, and in that scenario, he's just. I think
it's either a panic takedown, or I think it's Werdum takes Miocic down when he's tired later in the fight.
Yeah, Fabricio is actually a really good wrestler.
Yeah.
Like, this is the other kind of underrated piece of his evolution. We've talked a lot about his striking, but the shots that he hit on Travis Brown, who had never previously been taken down in an MMA fight, were gorgeous. He hit head inside singles. He hit clean doubles. Look at the way that he turned the corner. He is a fine technical wrestler at this point. Like, the days of him shooting god awful shots at Alistair Overeem from halfway across the cage and trying to pull half guard, that is not Werdum these days.
Yeah, I think he's taken everyone he's fought down in the last 6 fights except maybe Mark Hunt. And he knocked Mark Hunt out. I think he took Velasquez down. I think he took Nogueira down. He didn't take Russo down, but he knocked him out in 2 minutes. And I think he took Roy Nelson down.
Let me look at this. He did not take Roy Nelson down.
Okay.
He did not take Russo down. He did take down Big Nog. He took down Brown twice. He didn't take Hunt down, but he did take
Velasquez down. Yeah. Okay, so the last 4 fights, he's taken everyone down except Mark Hunt. And Mark Hunt, sneakily one of the best takedown defenders. But that's another credit in Stipe Miocic's favor, because Miocic took Mark Hunt down a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I think I think it's most likely that this goes to a decision, but I would not at all be surprised if Werdum submitted him. Credit to Miocic, though. It's not like Miocic doesn't have paths to victory here. He could crack Werdum. He's a hard enough puncher to crack Werdum.
Oh, absolutely.
He could win this on volume. He's a crisper boxer. If he can keep this at boxing range, he can outbox Werdum. He has paths to victory. We know how he can do this.
Yeah, that's why I think it's a good fight. Like, I'm not at all upset to see Miocic in this matchup. I think he still has potential to keep improving. I mean, Miocic is a fully grown man at this point. He's 33, but it's heavyweight. He's fighting a guy who's 5 years older than him who still looks like he's in top form. So I think Miocic, it's quite possible he comes into this fight, and as in the Mark Hunt fight, looks even a little better defensively, a little more disciplined in his approach. And who knows, we've never seen Miocic with such stakes on the line either. Miocic could be a guy who you give him a title shot and he really, really shows up, like Chris Weidman or someone like that. So you never know. I think it's a good matchup. I like Werdum, but it's an interesting fight. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, all the other fights we discussed, we mentioned that we were going to discuss Silva Hall, Hua Anderson, Lineker Font, and then a bit on Nelson Tumanov after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, and we are back. Pat, I've added more energy to my voice. How's it sound?
Sounds great. Sounds like you shoved a couple of 9 volts up your ass.
I listened to Mike Goldberg talking the other day. What fight was it when I was researching for my preview? I can't remember. And he was talking to Joe, and he suddenly went into patter mode while talking about while talking about a fighter. He was like, Joe, this fighter has really turned it up in the last year. And then Joe said something, and he was like, looking for the jab there, Joe. Like, he went back to regular Mike Goldberg. It was very jarring.
I like the idea of Goldberg having a patter mode that you can just switch on.
Oh, he does.
At some point,
You've never heard him read a promo? It's a very different man than the one who just says awkward things in the booth.
I mean, I've got a lot of things I could say here, but in the interest of, you can't say anything nice, don't say it at all, which is bullshit. Which is actual bullshit, but I'm going to stick with it for this moment.
I like to imagine that Mike just hits a rail of coke before he reads a promo, and that's what he did. He's calling the fight with Joe, and he was like, hold on. He does a quick bump, and then he starts talking about the fighters, and that's just what coked up Mike Goldberg sounds like.
Jesus. I don't think we can rule out any kind of stimulant.
Okay, so we are talking...
Before we get sued...
Yeah, we're talking about Anderson Silva, Uriah Hall first. It's the old Anderson Silva, who is no more, versus the next Anderson Silva, who wasn't to be. It's a pretty interesting fight. What do you think, Pat?
I think I have a hard time seeing how, short of every single judge buying into Anderson's oddball swagger, how he can win this fight.
Yeah,
because. So I noticed, right now, last I checked, Silva was a slight favorite. I think he was minus 120 and Hall was even money. But, I think that people keep waiting for Anderson Silva to come back, and that's just not going to happen. I think Anderson fought the best that he could against Michael Bisping, and it's telling that was the best that he could do, if that makes sense.
In multiple ways, because Anderson had some brilliant moments, and he had a lot of really shit moments too. It was. That's why I think people have such a hard time believing that Anderson is done or is on the serious decline, because when he still has really bright moments. When he knocked down Michael Bisping with that knee, when he hit him with that front kick to the chin in the 5th round, Anderson Silva can still stun you. And he's still powerful. He's still accurate. And so you see that, and you're like, okay, things just went wrong. Maybe he'll get his confidence back. But he had a lot of moments where he was... Anderson's one of those fighters where it's sad to watch because the old Anderson keeps wanting to come out, and his body can't do it anymore.
Yeah. That was the really striking thing to me about that Bisping fight is... More than anything else, more than Silva spending a lot of time swaggering, spending a lot of time trying to get in Bisping's head and shut down his offense. More than any of that, it was how short Anderson's bursts of offense were.
Yeah,
that he really genuinely could not fight hard for more than about 45 seconds at a time. So he went on this run at the end of the 1st round where it was okay, now Anderson's going to take over. And he starts marching Bisping down. And this is after throwing 2, 3, 4 strikes a minute for the first 3.5 minutes of the round.
Yep.
He's okay, now I'm going to turn it up. He throws 7 strikes in a 20-second stretch, and then he throws 1 more the rest of the round. He just can't maintain a pace for any amount of time. And that's...
Well, and also, he did that at the end of that 1st round, and then he got dropped. That's what happens now, is Anderson's okay, I'm going to turn it on, and he gets dropped. You had an interesting theory, Pat. I don't know how much you want to talk about this, because I know you were going to write about it, that Anderson's increase in, swagger and clowning sort of coincided with the beginning of his physical decline.
Yeah, so here's my shameless plug. I actually already wrote about this. It's up in the Washington Post.
I missed your piece. It's because it was the Washington Post. I missed it.
Yeah, so it went up on the Washington Post last week, and I'll send it around again this week to make sure that to get maximum mileage out of this.
To get maximum pluggage.
Exactly, just all the plugs. But yeah, so my theory here is that what we think of as prime Anderson, basically Silva who knocked out Forrest Griffin, the guy who beat Sonnen both times, did beat Yushin Okami, Belfort. That was actually post prime Anderson Silva. That was. I think that the real Anderson Silva, the actual prime version, was gone by the time he fought Patrick Cote. And so there were these two fights against Cote and Thales Leites that didn't make sense if you tried to view them in the arc of Silva's career, because it was like, he had these devastating performances and what was it, like 7 straight finishes to start his UFC career, and then he laid 2 eggs. Then he kills Forrest Griffin, so it's like we can kind of forget about that. But then he lays another egg against Damian Maia. And my theory here is that those 3 shitty fights against Maia, against Cote, against Leites were Anderson figuring out that he wasn't the guy that he used to be. And the way that we see that difference, the biggest difference there is the pace. That Anderson went from being a guy who worked fast, and that's why he had all those early finishes, because guys couldn't withstand the stream of offense once he had it, or once he started to put it out there. He went from that guy to having to be a counterpuncher, and I think that's why he stopped using the clinch so much, too. Because all that stuff takes energy. Yeah. And when you're 33, 34, 35, now 41, you cannot get into the kind of shape that you're in when you're 30, 31, or younger.
It is crazy to think of Anderson Silva's trademark swagger being like the product of him just getting tired more easily. But you can see it. I think that was definitely the case in the Bisping fight. It wasn't just Anderson struggling to find the offense, and yeah, he wasn't as fast. He wasn't as accurate. He was a lot more hittable. As a result of those things, his timing and his speed had decreased. And so those made it more difficult probably for him to muster some confidence to go. But also, he just got tired after about a minute and a half of hard fighting. And so he had to do a lot of masking, I think, to hide the fact that he was tired, to give himself a rest. The way Aaron Pryor used to pressure at an insane pace, and then he would box for a minute or so to recover, where he would just bounce around and do the Lamont Peterson versus Danny Garcia thing, where he would just make it look like he was outboxing you and he was really just trying to get his breath back so he didn't have to throw 50 power punches a minute. That's Anderson Silva now, and I think you're probably onto something there, that's what he's been doing for some time. And I think now fighters are not as cowed by it, and they have an easier time of finding success despite it, because he has slowed down and because he's easier to hurt. And because he probably he doesn't hurt you as easily. He doesn't cover distance as quickly. So, yeah, I'm not necessarily sure that I can't see a way Anderson Silva winning. In fact, I can see one very clear way Anderson Silva wins, which is that Uriah Hall is cowed. Because Uriah Hall is a physical specimen and a very talented fighter, but he has laid plenty of his own eggs in the past, and it's often been because he gives his opponent too much respect, likes or admires them too much, or maybe just doesn't have enough belief in his ability to beat them. And so he just kind of hangs around and waits for that perfect shot, or just waits for the fight to end. Now, I think he probably overcame that a bit recently. I mean, the third round of that Robert Whittaker fight, very encouraging for Uriah Hall's chances, because he came out and went nuts and really, really put it on Whittaker after clearly losing the first 2 rounds. But if any of that comes back, and God knows it could against Anderson, because I bet you Uriah Hall idolizes the hell out of him. He's going to be in there.
Does he have an Anderson Silva poster on his wall? Isn't this an established fact?
Okay, probably, yeah. That sounds about right. On Tough or something like that. So it's Anderson Silva. Like that, you're going in there, you're fighting a legend, one that you personally look up to, one who you've probably modeled a great deal of your style after, and one who is laughing at you and trying to make you feel stupid. I'm going to guess that Uriah Hall, with his issues of being bullied and stuff like that, and having this sort of inferiority complex that he seems to have, he might be more susceptible to that. In fact, I think he is more susceptible to that than most of the people Anderson has fought lately.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with all of that, but so the fact of Silva's physical decline is too much for me to overlook here.
I think all Hall needs is one really aggressive round, and he probably could beat Anderson.
Yeah, this is if Uriah Hall lets Silva inside his head, then Silva has a good chance of winning. But even in that case, I still think if Hall touches him with a clean right hand, he's going to knock Silva out. Like, even if he only throws like 4 or 5 of them over the course of the fight, if he lands one, I think that is still probably enough to put a guy who got knocked down cleanly and wobbled cleanly a couple more times by Michael Bisping out. Like,
the head kick he landed on Robert Whittaker twice in the 3rd round, I think that would have spelled Anderson's doom.
I agree with that. So,
yeah.
I don't know. So what's your pick here, Connor? What do you think's going to
It is Hall. It is Hall. I do think Anderson has a shot here just because, I mean, this is like picking, to me, this is like when I confidently picked Pelele over Bigfoot, because I'm like, oh, well, Bigfoot's done. At a certain point, you got to be like, okay, is this the kind of guy that's been beating him? And Uriah Hall is not Nick Diaz. He's not Michael Bisping. He's not Chris Weidman. But what he has that the last 2 guys Anderson has struggled with didn't, Diaz and Bisping, is power and speed. And so I do think he can make up for the fact that he doesn't have that kind of aggression and volume. He's not necessarily that consistent of a kind of fighter, but I do think he will probably clip Anderson at one point, if not many points, and that Anderson won't be able to keep up with the pace. Crazy enough, because I know Hall is really known for setting a pace, I don't think Anderson will be able to keep up with him once the fight gets going.
Yeah, like, so Hall throws on average about 7 or 8 strikes a minute. That is a really low pace, and even that is not a pace that Anderson Silva can keep up with in 2016.
And he has gotten better in that regard as his career has gone on. I think it's so easy because Uriah Hall was such a letdown. It's been really easy to overlook his improvements, but he has turned into a smarter version of himself. If not like an amazingly more technical fighter, he hasn't necessarily shored up all of his holes. I think he's turned into a more consistent version of himself.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any reason why he can't still be a good fighter, if not a great one. But okay, we got to move on. We got too many fights to talk about.
It's true.
Here.
Hua versus Anderson. Another similar fight here. We got Shogun, who Shogun has been looking. Well, Shogun's decline because his heyday was right around the time Anderson's was. His decline may have actually come around the same time as Anderson's, but it's taken him a lot longer to figure out how to be a crafty, a guileful veteran. And he's still not that great at it, but he has his moments. And then we have Corey Anderson, the guy who has the great misfortune of being in a division with only 33 fighters. And so Anderson is very, very talented, but he had a little more trouble with Tom Lawler than he was expected to. You and I both think he did win that fight. I know there was some disagreement, but he did get hurt a few times. He was getting caught. Lawler came in with an unexpected combination punching ability and put him on the back foot at periods throughout that fight. And the thing with Anderson is, we talked to Mark Henry last week. We know what a brilliant trainer he is. He works with Corey Anderson, and he said how impressively good Corey is despite his level of inexperience. But the fact of the matter is, he's 26 years old, and if he beats Shogun here, Shogun's already a pretty tough step up at this point in his career. If he beats Shogun here, which I expect he will, then he's going to fight someone really good. At least really good by light heavyweight standards. It's going to get really hard for him really soon, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I'm with all that. I mean, this fight, like, I don't know. What really stood out to me watching Shogun versus Antonio Rogerio Nogueira last August is that Shogun's speed is gone. Like, even when he was clearly declined, even when he was clearly no longer the fighter that he used to be, when he was losing, when he was fighting guys like Gustafsson, even the second Dan Henderson fight, he was still quick. He wasn't as fast, but he was still fast. Against Lone Log, he looked pretty average. He was getting outspeeded by Lone Log in a lot of cases, and that is not a good thing when you're fighting a young buck like Corey Anderson.
No,
like,
but I think he's probably still faster. And he's more experienced and more consistent, even now, than a guy like, who's the last guy Corey lost to? John Vellante. Yeah.
At this point, I think the Shogun has fallen so far off. I'm not convinced of that.
Would you pick John Vellante over him in a fight?
Over Shogun?
Yeah. It's a tough call, isn't it?
I'm not sure that I would, but how long it's taken me to give you an answer should tell you
one of the most depressingly funny pauses in the history of podcasting.
Yeah, I mean, but so Shogun still hits really hard. His power is still there. That's the last thing to go, both in his hands and in his kicks. He's always been a surprisingly good wrestler. If he can get on top of Corey Anderson, he can make some things happen. If he lands a couple of really good low and middle kicks, he can make something happen. I'm not sure Shogun's hips and knees would allow him to even throw head kicks.
No, maybe not. But he can throw low kicks, and Anderson, like a lot of Mark Henry fighters, guys who are so focused in their boxing, not great at defending kicks. He definitely wasn't that Vellante fight. I think who is still probably at least as fast a kicker as Vellante, who's not a quick light heavyweight. He did a really good job of throwing body kicks and leg kicks in that Nogueira fight too. I mean, the thing is, you can look at it and say, yeah, he was a lot slower than Nogueira. He got hurt in the first round, but he also displayed the veteran craft against another crafty veteran. And he actually put on a pretty good performance in those last 2 rounds where he really mitigated the things that Nogueira were doing that were giving him trouble. Again, like with Anderson Silva, there were just times in that fight, like early on, who was like, all right, I'm feeling it. I'm going to get going. I'm going to be Shogun again. And then he just gets tagged and hurt. And then he's like spending the next minute of the round being a poor man's Robbie Lawler, like still finding counters, but getting hit a lot and just surviving. And so it's tough. But when you actually it was a double-edged sword, because second half of that fight, he accepted the fact that he couldn't do that and found another way to win, which is great. But it was a little heartbreaking too, because he really wanted to be like aggressive, crazy Shogun, and he's just not anymore.
Yeah, and see, I think if he still had it in him to be that kind of aggressive, come forward, consistent pressure kind of guy, then I would give him a good shot here against a developing fighter who doesn't have the best evasive footwork, who's still learning to keep his back off the fence.
Yep.
I would give him a good shot, but I'm not sure that Shogun can consistently pressure at this point.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that he can maintain that kind of pace. Like, that Vellante, for all of his mini flaws, is a crafty low kicker. He's a guy who pushes a great pace despite being big, and who carries substantial power. And Shogun is a hard kicker, but not a ridiculously crafty one. And he can't maintain that kind of pace.
Because he was, like Anderson, he was like a super athlete in his prime. He was like ridiculously fast and very, very dexterous. And so I think he's one of those guys where when it goes away, he's not left with the same level of technique that a guy who has been relying on technique his whole career. He's not that guy. He's more Roy Jones than Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah, Shogun was also notorious for long periods of his career for not working very hard.
There you go.
And whatever you want to say about Anderson always put the time in. Okay. Always put the time
Shogun was
in.
more of a BJ Penn.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, especially when Shogun stopped working with Cordero, when he opened his own gym with his brother. Shogun was his own head coach. He was deciding, well, do I really feel like grappling today? Not really. I definitely don't feel like wrestling. So I'm going to hit some pads. I'm going to call it good. Maybe I'll spar a little bit, and we'll go home.
I did like the craft and the gamesmanship of Shogun under Cordero in his last fight. So I am actually intrigued to see how I'm interested to see Cordero versus Henry as much as I am to see Hua versus Anderson.
That's a good point. I don't know. So I'm taking Anderson. I think he takes a decision and just I think he has to overcome a few scary moments, because Shogun is still dangerous, still hits super hard, has the craft. Would not be surprised to see Shogun take Anderson down, actually. No. But in the grand scheme of things, I think you have to pick Anderson here, or at least I do.
I'm with you. Okay, so real quick, Lineker versus Font. John fucking Lineker is fighting Rob Font. Not an easy fight to pick, though. Not in my opinion.
Yeah, Lineker's a favorite. I like Font. I like Font here. Maybe it's, at the end of the day, I have a hard time seeing how a 5'2" bantamweight can make things work forever. I think this is the fight where height catches up to John Lineker.
I think so too. I'm with you. I was expecting you to go for Lineker. I know you and
Seriously?
I both.
God damn it!
I know
this always happens.
I know you and I both like Lineker, but we time will tell. Neither of us is imitating the other, because we both finished our previews and both of us have picked Rob Font.
Well, god damn it!
Yeah, I know. I like the lateral movement. I like the focus on kicks. I like the grappling. I just think Font is like he kind of has the edges I thought Francisco Rivera would have. Not so much power, but plus more mobility and minus the tendency to get into a crazy brawl.
Yeah, he is a really destructive puncher. Font is a really hard
surprisingly
puncher,
so, yeah.
But he's also a really sound, process-driven fighter in a way that Francisco Rivera is not necessarily.
Nor John Lineker. Like, John Lineker kind of has like a brawler's way of seeing the fight. Like, he's just going to keep pressing until something gives.
Yeah, and that works for John Lineker. Like, that is a rational approach if you have John Lineker's physical characteristics and tools and skill sets. Like, it's not like he's fighting in a way that doesn't maximize his chances of winning the fight. Like, that is John Lineker at his best. But I think in this fight, he's going to have some trouble. I think that Font is good enough at sticking and moving. He's good enough at picking his spots to sit down, and he's not going to just brawl with Lineker for the sake of brawling.
Yeah, the thing with Lineker, like, the reason I say that is because despite what you know of him when you think of John Lineker, it's not even like he's always a high-volume fighter. Like, he's just not it's not like you can easily narrow down what John Lineker does when he approaches a fight. He's not a given when he approaches a fight. Like, when he fought to Ali Bagotinov, pretty slow fight. I think we may see similar levels of volume from him here. I think he's going to have trouble cornering Font, and when that happens, it even happened early in the Ian McCall fight before McCall lost his nerve, where Lineker just he doesn't have great pressuring footwork. I don't think is pretty good. And he's not super fast, and he's short and doesn't have long arms. So I think he's going to struggle to find Font as much as he wants to.
Yeah, I'm with that. Because if we look at where Lineker's volume actually comes from, it comes from flurries. It comes from swarming.
Yes.
It comes when Lineker creates an opportunity, he capitalizes on that opportunity. But given his physical disadvantages in terms of height and reach, and like you pointed out, the lack of really clean pressure footwork, those opportunities are going to be limited. And when the opportunities are limited, so too is Lineker's volume.
Yeah, totally agreed. Okay, now really quickly before we wrap up, we laid a goose egg of our own last week, Pat. We very confidently picked Albert Tumenov over Gunnar Nelson. And he very completely lost. So I'm just going to let you talk for 2 minutes, because it's not often, we've said this before, it's not often that we feel like we have a really strong read on a fight, and we're pretty much way off. And so I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on why that was, and what the difference was between expectation and outcome.
So a few different things. I think first and foremost, drastically underestimated how fast Gunnar Nelson is. I think because Tumenov didn't really have that much trouble dealing with Lorenz Larkin, who is a faster fighter than Tumenov is, I kind of thought he would be able to handle another fast fighter in Gunnar Nelson here. But he really struggled with that. He really struggled when Nelson was able to close the distance. But we also saw a couple of distinct improvements from Nelson himself. First of all, he looked bigger. He looked like he'd been on a serious strength and conditioning program, and that was a relevant factor here. I think he was able, once he got in, to kind of overpower Tumenov at close range, because Nelson has always been a technical wrestler when he could get his hands on you. But here he showed much better entries combined with that speed advantage, his ability to hit reactive takedowns on Tumenov. He was able to put that wrestling to much better use than he has in the past. We've seen him have not great shots or really rely on his excellent timing, and here he was much better about getting in. And he was much better at chaining takedowns together. So credit to Nelson for proving us wrong. I mean, he made some legitimate improvements. He looked really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, that just about does it for us. No time for some heavy bag questions today, unfortunately, but we hope you more than made up for it with that wonderful, insightful, and fascinating interview with Dominick Cruz, and all of the wonderful, insightful things that we've just spent a little too long saying about UFC 198. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Find us on social media. I always forget to say this. You can find me at BoxingBush on Twitter, BUSCH. Patrick is at Patrick_Wyman. Check us both out, me on Bloody Elbow, and Sherdog Pat at the Washington Post and Bleacher Report. And we will talk to you about more fights next time. Oh, we have Garbrandt Almeida coming up soon. Hot damn. Good stuff.
Yeah,
so
it's looking good.
It's a very interesting slate of fights coming up in the very near future. All 3, 4, 5 of the next few cards are pretty damn good. So we're looking forward to it. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been a Heavy Hands.